It's your birthday. It's my birthday. It's a birthday. Anyway, hello and welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name's Nicole. I am participating in the hardest reading challenge you'll ever do 3, and I am working on the It's Your Birthday prompt. Yeah, I don't know why I was getting stuck on that. But for this prompt, you need to read, I guess it's a collection of 7 different books that fit the It's Your Birthday prompt. In this video, I'm going to share with you these 7 books that I have picked thus far for all of these prompts, as well as do a book review for the handful of them that I have actually managed to read this month. So let's go over the prompts one at a time and the book that I picked for each. For the first prompt, you need to read a book that in some way matches your birthstone. I was born in the month of July, so it is actually my birthday this month, and that means that my birthstone is a ruby. And for that, I chose Queen Margot, which she does have a ruby in her crown. It's kind of hard to see, but I swear she has them. She may also have garnets or rubies in her earrings. Really hard to tell. I'm calling them rubies because that's pretty much the only book that I own that I know will work for that. For a book published in my birthday month, which again is July, I'm going with the Stepford Wives. This particular edition was not published in July, but there is an edition of the book that's published in July. I think that counts. That's as close as I'm getting. For the book that matches my zodiac sign, my astrological sign, I am going with Nat Turner, and I will put up on the screen what the description of the zodiac sign is. And when I go to review this book, because this is one of the books that I've read, hopefully you'll see how it's related to my astrological sign. For my Chinese zodiac sign, I am the sign of the monkey, and so I felt like the Monkey King. Duh, that fits perfectly in a lot of ways, I feel like. For the flower, I chose Kokun. I have actually already read and reviewed this book, so you can go ahead and look at that if you want. I will put in the description box below a link to the video where I reviewed this book, but this does count for the my month's flower, which is the larkspur, which are these sort of tall cone-shaped flowers that you see on the front here. And like I said, I do have a review of that already. For the tree, my birth tree is an oak tree, and I went with the other valley. I feel like the valley that's here definitely should have an oak tree in it, and probably has an oak tree pictured. I don't know if you can see it, but over the letter H, I definitely feel like that's an oak tree. And then for my name, the meaning of your name, you needed to choose a book that has similar vibes to the meaning of your name. I was going to go with my first name, which is Nicole, like I said, but then I decided that was too complicated. My first name means people of victory, which I guess isn't that hard, but I don't know. It just felt too abstract for me. So I decided to switch to my middle name, which is Chantel, which the meaning that I found for it apparently is stone. And I was like, oh, that's way easier. I thought about cutting for stone, but I think the book I'm most likely going to read is The Idiot, because there's literally a stone on the cover of this book. All right, now I'm going to move on to the book reviews, where I'm going to talk about the 3 books that I've managed to read this month. The Stepford Wives by Levin is published in 1972 and is a horror or thriller novel. It is about Joanna, who is a semi-professional photographer, and her husband. They are living with their 2 children and have recently moved to the new town of Stepford in Connecticut, and there they have decided to leave the city and move to the suburbs, something that was fairly popular to do at the time that this was written. They want to get out of the big city and really have room for their children to run around and play and just live that great suburban life. Joanna in particular is really hoping to move forward in her photography career and take it from just a part-time thing that she's doing, picking up freelance jobs, and really get into it full time. However, not everything goes as planned, because the beautiful and quaint town of Stepford doesn't turn out to be everything that Joanna was expecting. All of the wives there, while friendly, seem also rather distant and unavailable, because they seem to have hyper focus on cleaning and taking care of their homes and families, which is not something that Joanna is against, but it's something that starts to very quickly become bizarre and overdone. As the book goes on, Joanna struggles to make friends because everybody's too busy waxing their floors, and she is finding herself trying to unravel the mystery of why all the women in this town seem completely obsessed and more dead than alive. This book is structured in a really interesting manner. It's very fast-paced, there's very few chapters, and it's told in 3 parts, and each of these parts just kind of flows along. There are page breaks, but there are no chapter breaks in each of the 3 parts. I mean, it's a very short book, so it's definitely something that's fun for a one-day read if that's something that you're looking for. This covers a lot of ideas having to do with the women's movement and women's liberation that was happening at the time period when this was originally published. It also gets into gender relations between men and women, and also talks about a lot about sexuality, because those were both issues that were coming up in the women's liberation movement, particularly here in the US in the 1970s. I thought this book was really well paced. I thought the mystery of it was really good, and I liked the sort of subtlety that was involved in the ending of this book. I will say I have seen the movies of the Stepford Wives, so if you have seen that, this book is not going to seem very mysterious to you, but despite that, I really wanted to read the book because I've never read it, and even though I had seen both of the movie adaptations of this book, I still really enjoyed the book itself. Can I say book anymore? If there was anything I didn't enjoy about this book, it's just that I felt like the big reveal, twist, or discovery or whatever that happens for the character just happened very suddenly. Like, she sort of pieced together a few things and jumped to the wildest conclusion is what it felt like to me, even though I knew that that's what was coming. It just didn't make sense to me that the protagonist in the book, Joanna, figured it out as easily as she did. It just seemed like, I don't know if given that information, that's the conclusion I would have come to. I also feel like I struggled a little bit with the characterization of Joanna and some of her friends that she did make. I felt like they were a bit over-sexualized in a way that tends to happen in books written in the 70s. At the same time, that was part of the women's liberation movement at that time, and Ira Levin is trying to say something about that. Specifically, he's trying to talk about the extent that men will go to try and repress that. So it makes sense that in this book, it would really be trying to express how women want to be seen and viewed and live as more sexual creatures. So it's one of those things where it seems awkward now, but it makes a lot of sense for then. I don't know if that's clear, but hopefully it is. I really did like the themes in this book and the way that it was pictured that the men would treat women, and even the way that women treated women in the book. It was definitely a book that in a very short time manages to communicate the difficulties and the conflict that was going on in the social spheres during this time period. And honestly, I'd recommend this book. And it wasn't the one, like I said, that I was planning to read for, published in July, but I was running out of time in the week that I was reading these books, and I did want to read this sooner than later. And so I was like, well, the only other book that I could fit in was this, and I really wanted to fit in 3 books for this prompt this month, so there you go. The Other Valley by Scott Alexander Howard was published in 2024 and is a work of speculative science fiction and has some magical realism as well. This is a book about Oldile, who is 16 years old and is growing up in a valley that has some unique properties. To the west of the valley, you can cross over the mountains and you'll go 20 years in the past. If you cross over the mountains to the east, you go 20 years into the future. And Odell really wants to just be able to choose what apprenticeship she's going to go into. She is pretty quiet and she really just wants a job that's just going to allow her to disappear and do whatever she wants, kind of like she views her mom's job working for the council. However, one day she spots Edmies, one of her classmates' parents, who are visiting from the future, and she's suddenly faced with the choice whether to tell him that they're visiting, which means that he has most likely died unexpectedly and young. And so she has to decide whether she wants to reveal this to him or conceal the future from him. And all of these options come with some pretty high stakes. This is told in the first person by Odile, and it follows her over the course of her life, and we get to see how the decisions and choices she makes are impacting her life and the lives of those around her. This talks about a lot of different things, including grief, longing, change and consequences, the history and the future, and how those are impacted by our daily decisions, as well as a lot of discussion about friendship. I really thought this book was going to be a lot more about Odile joining the council and getting to be part of the decision making of who goes east or who gets to go west. And that's really not what this book is about. This book is really about her and her initial relationship with this other young man and the friends that she kind of makes. It is a lot more about her experience as a teenager and then how that affects her later life. And this book is also about a lot about grief and regret. And those were things that I was not expecting to read about. Like, there was some indication of that on the back. I don't know. It was just, it went in a very different direction than I was personally expecting. This was also a slower paced book than I expected, just based on how the book started. But all that said, I think my biggest pet peeve with the book is that I felt like a lot of the loops on the sci-fi side weren't closed. As I mentioned, this whole book takes place in a valley that is set between basically a mountain range, and that in one direction you go west, the other direction you go east, and depending on which side you cross, you either go into the past or into the future. Nobody ever talks about what's to the north and south other than more mountains. But the thing that bothered me about this setup for this town is that it made me wonder how they got some of the things in the town. It's constantly mentioned that this is just a town, we're supposed to believe it's self-sufficient and that kind of thing. However, they have everything you could imagine in this town. People play all sorts of instruments in orchestras and bands. They have all sorts of computer technology. They have like luxury clothing goods as well as regular clothing goods. And I'm just thinking, you keep saying this is a town, but it really sounds more like an industrialized city, or it would kind of have to be in order for people to have all these material goods. And it's never explained how they have all these material goods. Like, at one point, the protagonist, she even goes to a bookstore full of books and has to decide what she wants to read, where I'm like, if you lived in something that you would call a town and not a city, there wouldn't necessarily be enough prolific authors in your town to fill a whole bookstore. I mean, I guess it's covering like centuries, but they never mentioned really like multiple factories or anything like that. So I got kind of hung up on that. I felt like it was kind of like an open loop that I needed closed and explained to some extent. So I would definitely say this is soft sci-fi. That said, I do think the tension in the book was really good. The interest did pick up and the pacing picked up a little bit later on. I thought it finished well, and I did find the plot really interesting and engaging. And even though it wasn't the story I thought it was going to be, I did think the story went to really intriguing and unexpected places. There were a couple of moments where I really gasped because I didn't see some of the things that occurred happening, and I did enjoy that aspect. I think this is a really good book for anybody who is grieving or is pondering grief. I think it answers questions just through one lens of how things might work out, and there is an emphasis on the characters and characterization. So if you like that and you don't mind a slow-paced book, I think this would actually work really well for you. Just know that grief and grieving is a fairly predominant theme within this book. That is it for this choice. Let's move on to the second book. And I can see out of the corner of my eye the blur on the side of the book, and it's making the whole corner of my vision feel like it's blurred. It's so bizarre. Anyway, let's move on. Nat Turner by Kyle Baker was published in 2008 and is a work of nonfiction with topics related to historical fiction and reviewing the slave rebellion held by Nat Turner. This is a comic book or a graphic novel. I'm not really sure what the difference between a comic and graphic novel is, so if you know, please put that in the comments below and help me figure that out, because I've seen it listed as both. I would assume that this is more a graphic novel. I don't know. There are photos like this, or panels like this rather, and then there is this writing on the left hand side, and I will talk about what that's about in just a moment. But this is a recounting of Nat Turner's 1831 slave rebellion, and it's as told from his confessions. So there is a historical document called the Confessions of Nat Turner, and pretty much all the text that you do see in this book, and I have to be careful. Maybe not that choice. Every time you see text like this in the book here, that's not in the panels. That is actual text from Nat Turner's Confessions, the historical document. And I have to be careful what pictures I show in here because Kyle Baker does not hold back. There are some graphic images of what's going on. I wouldn't say they're horribly graphic, but they're very powerful, strong images. So you might want to check, you know, your content warnings, that kind of thing. And I certainly don't want to accidentally show you things. It explores what Kyle Baker said was a significant man whom we actually know little about. This is also about the power of knowledge, especially the power of reading, at least as far as Kyle Baker is concerned. That was something that he wanted to focus on in this novel, and I think you see that in the panels that he has included, how he has incorporated this own sense of how important reading and education is. I have been working on a Nat Turner project for a while where I'm just picking up and reading different works about Nat Turner. I thought the artwork in here was absolutely beautiful. It was expressive, it was complex, it really communicated a lot of emotion and feeling. It's also pretty brutal, so like I said, check your trigger warnings. And if there was anything I didn't like about it, I did sometimes feel like the expressions of the characters' faces sort of moved towards being the caricatures of Sambo, and it wasn't clear to me whether or not that was intentional on the part of Kyle Baker. And so there were a few panels that made me uncomfortable because I felt like his intention and what he was trying to express was unclear. I don't know if it has all of his confessions in here, but you do get some of the language from his confessions in here. You get a visual sense of what was going on and just how brutal that rebellion was. I definitely would say, though, this is not the book that you should stop at, because beyond having a discussion of the importance of reading and education, it really doesn't go further into why this rebellion would have happened and what it meant for the area and what preceded it as well as what followed it. I mean, it does talk about that like in brief in some of the panels, but I think just a broader discussion would definitely be needed, and that this book alone isn't enough to fill out the whole story and the whole scope of what was going on in the US or in Virginia during this time period. I gave this book 5 stars, and I'm just realizing I didn't tell you what I rated any of the other books. So let me do that as I wrap this video up. Okay, I'm just realizing I didn't tell you because I didn't write that down. So hopefully while I was talking about them, editing me went back and put on the screen what I rated all of the books. That is it for this video. These are the 3 books that I read. The 4th one also being Kokun. So I have made some pretty decent progress on the hardest reading challenge you'll ever do, number 3, It's Your Birthday. And yeah, I just have 3 other books to read to fit those slots or finish those off, and they might be these 3 that I showed you at the beginning, but you never know. I do have a couple of other options for Stone. I have one other option that I figured out would work for instead of the Monkey King. Queen Margot is probably the only option I have for Ruby, unless I go with something that's ruby colored, which I think you can do. Anyway, let me know if you are doing the hardest reading challenge and what your picks would be for these prompts, and I'll talk to you next time.